Welcome to part 2 of our Tinder clone using Ruby on Rails 6. And in this video we are going to improve where we got to in our last video. So in our last video we have these buttons at the bottom underneath the user's photograph, and they can be clicked and it transitions to a new user. However, we haven't got anything going on in the back end up until this point. So in this video we are going to be setting up the ability to like a user, and that like will be stored in the database. So to begin here, I'm going to set up a post URL in our routes file, and we'll pass this to a method and we'll pass in the user ID of this user that we're liking, and then we'll also set up a route for the decline. So before we get too deep into our app, I just want to remind you guys, if you enjoy this content, to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like if it is helpful to you. And aside from that, I'm releasing a Ruby on Rails 6 course for beginners, and that will be coming out very soon. So do drop a comment below if you want to hear more about that, and I will notify you when that is released. And I will also include a link below where you can enter your email address, and I will notify you when the course is live. So back in our code now, I'm using this data ID that we have added to the slide in a previous video. So what we want to do is use that ID of the user, and within our JavaScript then we want to be passing that into the AJAX method. So the AJAX will make the request to our controller, and it will pass in that user ID that we are making a decision about. So we can look at our web console here just to see that ID being output. So we just tested it before we go too far with it. So it's reading that ID correctly. So that should be fine. So within our AJAX request, we are setting a URL, and this is the URL that we created in our routes file. So we have this /approve, and then we add on the user ID at the end, and we're setting the method as post and the data type as AJAX. So within our controller then, we will just run the logger to output a message to our logs showing the param that has been passed. So in this case it's the ID. And if we look in the network tab on our developer tools, we can see that a request is being made with the ID at the end. So that's the user ID. And if we have a look at our logs for Rails, we can see here that the ID is being set. So it's saying user ID for matching is 6, so that's what we put in our controller. And we just need to have some message then being returned back to the browser after this approved method is called. And of course then we'll need some functionality for actually storing that like. So we'll go ahead and we'll create a model for the like itself. When a request is sent, then we will create a new like and store that in the database. So when we created our model using the Rails generate model command, it has also created this database migration for us. So we're just going to add some fields into this migration, and we want to say that we are using the account as a reference, and we'll also add a integer here for our liked ID. So this is going to be the ID of the user that we are liking at this point. So I will name this liked account ID, as I think it's descriptive and we can quickly understand what it's being used for, this information. So let's run our database migration now, and that will update our schema file for us. And now if you go back to our browse controller, in here we're going to create this like. So once this approve method is called, we'll do a like.new, and then we can store that to a variable. So we'll pass in the liked account ID, and we'll use the params ID for that. So we can actually set this as a variable, account ID, and then pass in the params, as you'll be using this in more than one place. And we'll call this new like, and then we can easily add a condition here to say that if this new like is saved, then we will do one set of actions, and then otherwise we'll do something else. So it's just an easy way to ensure that it is saved, and then handle the response appropriately. So we'll set the account ID of this new like to our current account. So that is our logged in account at this moment, the ID of that account. So if this new like has been saved, we can also make a check to see if this user that we're liking likes us back already. And then if they do like us back, then we can alert the user that this user likes you. You may want to send them a message or something like that. So I think most dating websites work in this way. I know that on Tinder, for example, if you get a match, then it automatically matches you and you can message that user. So in this case, we are just going to use the like.where, and we'll pass in the account ID of that user, and we will see if that user has a liked account ID of our ID. So that will be considered a match in this case. So we'll name this existing like, and then we'll say if existing like, so we'll use the count method to get a number from this. So if existing like is more than 0, then they like us equals true. And in fact, we can even just shorten this statement. So we can just leave it as a greater than 0. So it'll return a true or false value for they like us. And then we will add this condition here to say that if they like us, then we will handle some additional code here. But we can leave that for now. We can come back to this one later. We can just pass this instance variable to true or false. In fact, you can actually even shorten this further again just by calling this an instance variable instead. So you don't need that conditional then. So there are many ways to write code, and that's something that's really useful to bear in mind, that you can write code in a more logical long-form approach, but quite often you can go back and refactor that to make it much shorter and more concise. So where possible, we like to keep the code as short as possible. It just makes our life easier in the future. And I'm going to add some basic validation here now to our like model. So in this case, we want to validate the uniqueness of that new entry being saved. So we want to ensure that it doesn't already exist. We don't want to be liking the same user more than once. So now let's go ahead and try out liking a user to see what happens. So we can see that the post is being made, and if we look at the logs, we can see that the like is being inserted into the database, and it's got the account ID and the liked account ID. So that looks good. What we can do now is reload the page and see if that user still appears. So currently it does, and if we like this user again, we can see that it is not saving this new like. So that's exactly what we wanted to happen. We don't want that user to be liked twice by our account. So reloading the page now, we really want this user to be hidden from us once the page loads. So in order to do that, there are a few ways we can do this, but a quick solution for us will just be to load the accounts that we have liked already. And we will basically just map the liked account ID. So we're going to get an array of IDs that we do not want to be loading. So we can use this array of IDs and pass it into this account.where statement. So we want to be ensuring that we don't select any of the accounts that we've already liked previously. So we can do this by passing in our own ID into this liked account IDs. So we'll just append that to the end of the array using the 2 arrow symbol. And then we're saying account.where.not. So what that means is we're just loading all the accounts that are not found within this list of IDs. And the next thing we're going to do is define a way to find the current matches of a user's account. So we'll create a method within our account model, and we'll say this method is called matches, and in here we are going to select all the accounts that like us and we like them back, and then we will return a list of those accounts so that the front end we can display those to the browser. So we'll start here by firstly gathering the IDs of users that we like. So we can say that the account ID this is going to be our own ID in this case. So firstly we can change this variable name to liked account IDs, but the account ID will be our self.id. So self referring to this model, this instance of the model that is loaded, which is our existing account, logged in account. So, and then we are finally just mapping the liked account IDs, as you can see on the first line of this method. So I'm creating an array of liked account IDs. And then on the second line, we have likes me account IDs. So this will be the users that like us back. So in this case, we're saying the liked account ID is our ID. So people are liking us. And then we are mapping the account ID. So that again is their ID, the user who is liking us. That's a list of their IDs. So we have two arrays of IDs now. And what we need to do then is compare these two arrays. So we want to see where they match. So we will create a new matched IDs array here. And what we are doing with this matched IDs is we're using the liked account IDs, and we are going to iterate over every ID in that array and select only those from that array that are found in this likes me accounts ID array. Now this is a little bit confusing to understand at first, but basically we're looping over an array and picking out the ones that match from a different array. So that way we're getting a list of IDs that are matches. So we'll test this out in the Rails console first. And we're not seeing any matches currently, but that is because we have not added any likes from different accounts yet. So you can just test this out by outputting the arrays and see what happens. So reload the console, try again, and we're getting the IDs that are being output here are the ones that we like. But as you can see, the bottom array is not returning anything yet. So what we can do to test this out is to create some likes between accounts and check if that works. But once we have this matched IDs, then we can do the account.where and select those accounts based on that array of IDs. So we'll want to output this information under the My Matches tab at the top. So in this case, I'm going to create a fake like from the console. So I'll just pass in some values here just to make a match in this case. We're going to say that the account number 2 likes account number 1, which is our account. And then we will try this over again. You can see that there are both arrays are returning a value currently. And now we're getting the account that is a match. So that appears to be working. So the next step will be to get this to work on the front end. So let's create a new link from our routes file. So create a new route in here, and we'll create a new method under the browse controller and call it matches. And we can simplify this code a lot here. We'll just say matches equals account. So it's going to be the current account, and then we'll say dot matches. So that should return a list of users. And now within our views, we will create a new file in the browse folder. So we'll call this matches. And then in here, we want to loop over this array of users. So we'll wrap this in some HTML first. In actual fact, what we can do here is render a partial, because we may want to move this list of users into a different location of the app later. So I'm thinking we're going to have a sidebar later, but just as a quick measure right now, we're just going to have a single page for these matches. So we'll just paste in this HTML, and then we will iterate over this list of matches and output some basic information. So here we can say, we can first put this in a row and then put a So we're creating these into a column, really is what we want to be doing. And so we'll just use the bootstrap column small 4, so we'll do about 3 wide. And then we can output the image. So we'll take the first image that user has uploaded. And I think we're going to, well, we can set this as an image tag, but we will use the image fluid, which makes it scale to fit that column size. So make it a little bit more responsive on different screen sizes. So now let's update this link on the My Matches under the navigation, and we can test this out. And sayingly, there is no method for URL, so I think we need to remove that, I think, from the image tag. I'm just checking how I did it earlier. So the image uploads were handled using active storage, and I don't think the URL method exists for active storage, so we can remove that. So we can use the images.attached to check to see if there's an image available. So if you've been following some of the previous videos I have made, I normally use Carrier Wave to handle file uploads to Amazon, but in this case I decided to use active storage just to share a little bit about how that works for anyone who's quite new to developing Rails apps. So in this case we are going to get rid of the image that we have right now, and we're going to move it into a background image for this this div. So we can style this up so that it just covers the background of this div. So we'll use a inline style sheet to do this, and we'll say that the background image is from this URL, and we'll use the URL for helper to output the URL of this active storage file. So then we've created a matches style sheet, and then we will say that the background size is covering this div. So we have a div class of match tile, and we'll just set a alignment of the background and the non-repeat of the background. So you can put a little bit more effort into this to style this thing up, but we just want to go very minimal here right now. We just want a tile that shows the background image, and then we'll put a name on that tile. So we can still see that our background image is not showing correctly. And I think that's because of our height and width values. So we haven't declared those properly. We set them as percentages, but in this case it's not working. We need to have a fixed value. So let's go ahead now, and we can add a rounded class just to make it look a little bit nicer. So it rounds the edges of the image. So that's a class, a CSS class that is part of the Bootstrap framework. And what I'm doing here really is, the next thing I'm doing here is I'm setting a cursor for the image. So we can see that the icon has changed for the mouse just by changing the style sheet. So we can go back to Tinder.com and check how things are looking over here. So we can see here that these images have this rounded border shape, but they also have the name of the user as an overlay. So let's try to do that now. We'll output the name of the user in white text, and we'll position that in the bottom left of this tiled div. So it'll sit on top of the background image for that user. So we'll set a position of absolute on this text, and then we'll say that it is on the bottom left. So we'll pass in values for that, and then we can make the background tile to a position relative. And so that's so that it bases the positioning of the parent, which is this match tile in this case. So we've bolded the text, and it looks pretty reasonable right now. So the end goal of our app is that we click on these user icons and we load up this chat window of that user. So these don't have to be links, but they can be handled by JavaScript. So the loading of the information about the user in the chat window, that can happen using JavaScript. So going back to our matches now, we're just adding a ID, a data ID of that user. And if we create this matches.js within our JavaScript folder, so our JavaScript includes folder, and then in here we can attach an event handler onto this match tile. So when a user clicks on the match tile, we'll execute some code, and in this case we will be using this ID that we have added, this data ID, and we'll do something using that ID. So we'll load some details about that user using the ID. So in this case, I'm just going to output this ID to the console just to see that we're getting that information correctly. And since we're using this ID in more than one location, we're going to move it into a variable, and we'll just call that variable in the console log. So let's test this to see if it works. And it looks like we haven't included our code here, so we'll add this to the application.js under packs. And something's still not working here. So we should really wrap this in a function. So what's happening here is this is being called before JavaScript or before jQuery gets loaded. So if you run that, wrap it around that function, it just says don't call this code until the document has finished loading. So what we want to do here is add a sidebar like it has on Tinder. So you'll see the matches on the left, and then on the center of the page you'll see new users that you can click and go through. So in my case, I've just clicked, I've liked a whole bunch of users just to gather some matches here to see how that works. So in the case of Tinder as a web app, it basically all operates as a single page application, or at least very close to it. They don't really have multiple pages. You just sign in, you like or dislike users, and then on the same page is a list of your matches. You click on that, then you can interact with the user. So we'll try to get our app something similar to that. And since we're combining both the views into one, I'm actually going to move the code into the same file in this case. At this point, we don't have a lot of code for interacting with the user, so it should be fine. Perhaps in the future, we can refactor this if there's a lot of code required. Now I'm going to add a sidebar for our matches. So we can create a row and a two-column layout. So left column will be the sidebar, and then the right column, which will be larger, will be for new matches, or sorry, new users that we can interact with and like or dislike. So we'll move the existing code up into this wider column, and then we will paste in our render partial code. So let's drop this in, and they should both now work on the same page. So when we test this out, we can see that we do need to move this matches up into our browse view to get rid of that error. Let's try this again, and we can see now that it is working. So what I'm going to do next is improve the design or the layout of this page. So on the left column, I want it to be noticeably separate from the main column on the right. So I will update and try to set some background color to separate the two. I want to basically get it to match what is on Tinder or something very similar to that. So there is a distinguishing difference between the left column and the right column. So while I work on that, I just want to take a moment to remind you guys that I will be releasing a new Ruby on Rails course in the next couple of weeks. And if you're interested in that, I will put a link in the description where you can sign up to a mailing list. And what I will do is once the course goes live, I will send out an email to everyone on that list to let you know that the course is live. And there may even be a promotional code in there for the first couple of days when the course goes live. So do take the time to sign up for that if that interests you. And aside from that, if you haven't seen some of my previous videos, I normally do a MVP, or a minimum viable product. So what that is basically once I build these apps, I take a little bit of time to finish them out, and then I sell them on my website. Now that's something that some startups or entrepreneurs are interested in, but if that's not for you, that's totally fine. But if that's something you're interested in, there will be a link in the description below where you can purchase this Tinder clone when it is finished. So keep an eye out for that too. And finally, I just want to say that I'm really grateful for all the positive comments we've been getting on the videos over this past few weeks. And you guys have been really great, and I've been getting a lot more likes on the videos than I ever expected. So that's been really awesome. So I really want to thank you guys for that. I really, really appreciate it. So getting back to our app now, I now want to add in a navigation for switching between matches and messages. So I'm going to use this from Bootstrap, this template code for that. So we're going to drop that in, and we'll just update the names on the buttons for this, or on the navigation. We'll take off the last piece of navigation. So we'll just update the values here and test this out. And we can use our render partial within the tab panel, and then under messages we will just say no messages to display. So later we will add those messages. So that seems to be working. And I'm also going to add a margin here to the left to basically align the tab navigation with the images underneath, the profiles underneath. So we'll add a margin to the top as well, and then we will also update the margin on the matches panel. We'll tweak that, and the layout's looking pretty good right now. I'm happy with that. So we'll just do the same for the messages. And we'll have a look at the markup here. Something's not quite right with how this is being displayed. So for the matches, we do have a column class on a div. So let's try to replicate that. And I think that's close enough. I don't want to spend too much time messing around with this, but just try to get it looking decent first. So I want to add this top bar to the left column. So ideally we will remove this top, the very top navigation bar at the top of the page, and then we will have this small bar like they have on Tinder with a profile icon and a probably a log out button there too. So let's set that up now. Let's create a new partial called profile bar, and in here we will then output a link. And we want the text on this link to be white, so we'll add the class of text white, and we can leave this as a blank, just a dummy link for now. So we'll add a background color just to see how it looks first, but we'll have to tweak it. So it does look a bit strange right now, this big red bar at the top, but in a few minutes we should get this tidied up and looking a lot more like what we see on Tinder. So I'm just trying to get the padding and the spacing right here first. So we've got a H3 class, so that will make the text larger. And because this is a link that we are using, the default layout of a link is inline. So the default display is inline. So we will change this to be a display of block. So that allows us to do our padding and our margins and everything else. And within this link, then we also want to have a profile image, thumbnail of a profile image. So what I'm going to do is change this link to into a block. So we can do that by adding the DO at the end. So it's wrapping this as a block, and then we'll have our icon inside our profile image. So for this, we'll just pull out the first profile image of that user, which is our account. And then beneath that, we'll have the text saying my profile. So everything within this block will be clickable as a link. So I have made the image rounded here, but because there is a different dimensions, so the two dimensions are not the same, the height and the width. So I'm just going to try and force those to fit in this case. But if it is a perfectly square image, then this shouldn't be an issue. There will be no skewing of that image. So this is starting to look a little bit better here. So I've added a new thumbnail class here, and I'm going to add a new style sheet for the profile. So that anything profile related I'll put into the style sheet. So for this image, I want to add a white border around it. And we can see that that matches. It's very similar to what we have on Tinder. And we can make our image a little bit smaller just to match. So the next thing I want to do here is create a different background color for this this bar. So we will add a class here called profile bar, and then we will add that within our style sheet. And while we were here, we will also add a hover effect to our link within the top bar here. So this profile, my profile, should have a text decoration of none once it's hovered. And I'm going to take a bit of a shortcut here, and I'm just going to copy the style of the background color on Tinder. So you can see here they have a linear gradient with two colors. So I'm just going to paste this in, and that should give us something similar. So that's pretty good. We can fix the padding on the top and bottom, so this spaces out a little bit better. So we'll add a padding of 20 pixels to the top and bottom, and we can trim that down to 10 pixels. And you can take this further and style this up even more. I'm just trying to get the very basic version of this together. So I'm going to take out some of these margins and paddings, and I will apply those directly within the style sheet itself. So I just want to get this lined up with the elements underneath, the navigation and the profile images. And I'll remove this heading 4 class, and we can set the font size directly in the style sheet. Set that to 28 pixels. It's still a little bit large looking, so we can probably tweak this further. We can also set a line height. So now I want to have a look at our navigation underneath. So I want to make this a little bit more like we see on Tinder. So they have this underline for the selected tab. So let's try to do a similar style to that. So I will add a class to this navigation. So I've removed the default bootstrap class of navpill, and I will add our custom class. So now let's add some custom styling for our navigation items. So I will add a border to the bottom of the tab, and I'm just adding a solid red border, but we're not seeing it here at the moment, so I'm trying to figure out why that is. So we have the nav Tinder sidebar, okay, and that is for the active class. So we just need to make sure that it is within this. Oh, I think I know what's going on here. So this is not within the profile bar. So I think the class is supposed to be within the profile bar. Let's have a look at that again and see if we can move that. Move that code outside of that profile bar. This should work. And I have just switched this color to be one of the colors is used on the top bar, so you can see this color. And I'll switch it again to get the more pink color. So that's looking pretty good right now. So the next thing I want to do is move this sign out button across onto the profile bar itself. So we can see on Tinder they don't have this top navigation, this top bar that we have at the top. So I want to remove that and put the sign out link here, and once they click on the my profile, that will take them to the settings. So that should do away with that top section altogether. So let's have a look at that now and try to fix this up. So inside our application template, I'm going to add this unless account signed in. So we will show this navigation at the very top if the user has not signed into their account. So that will allow them to go and sign up for a new account or to sign in. But once they're signed in, that top bar will disappear altogether. And then we will add a quick redirect here. If the user has already signed in and they try to visit the home page, they will be taken directly to this this dashboard path, this browse profiles path. So now within our profile bar again, let's update this link to make it work, so it will point to the settings page. So I have decided to take this out of the block that we had. Now you could keep it in the block and just have the whole thing linked to the edit account registration path, but since we are having the sign out link here too, it just makes more sense to separate these. So I will add the sign out link and it will point to the destroy account session path, and we'll float that to the right and we'll use a method as delete, so that should work correctly. So let's reload the page and see how this looks. So it's looking a little bit strange right now. The alignment of things are all over the place, but let's try to fix this up. So we'll add a link for the image tag, and it will also point to the edit account registration. And again, the edit account registration needs to be fixed up also, but for now we just want to get the main functionality working. So the sign out does work. So we'll sign back in again. Let's check. Okay, that's good. So let's get the alignment of these links fixed up. So we'll add a custom style here for the sign out link, and we'll set a font size in our style sheet. And we'll also create the style specifically for my profile link. So we'll add classes just so that these are accepting these styles we've added. Okay, so if we remove the block tag, that will fix this alignment problem we were having. And they're starting to look a bit better now. We can play around with the margins on these to try and get things right. So I'm spending a little bit more time than I wanted to here on the styling, but I think it's kind of important when you're building an application that you treat the front end and back end with the attention that it deserves. So in this case we're doing full stack development, so it's always good to get the design elements looking as good as possible, but I think we're pretty much there with it. It's looking really good right now, so I won't be spending a lot more time on this navigation bar here. So it looks pretty good. Overall I'm quite happy with it. And other than that, the last couple of things we can do here is to firstly move this main image on the center of the page to bring it down from the top, because it's really tight to the top of the window right now. So we'll tweak this around a little bit, figure out how we can move this down so that we have this set without a margin right now. So adding a margin will push that down. And once we get that in place, we also want to take out the footer on the bottom of the page. but let's get this slider cleaned up first. So we just want a little bit of space between the top and the bottom of the slider to allow some space in our design so it doesn't feel so cramped. So another thing you'll notice here in the design is there's this white space between the two sections on the page, and it's a little bit annoying because it just doesn't look quite right. There's like the gray area and then the white area. There's kind of a gap between that top bar. So what we can do to fix this, and maybe it's not the best way, but it's a quick way to fix this, would be to put a negative margin on the right of the profile bar, and that will just stretch out to fit that space. So I think that's good enough for us for now. It just kind of fixes that little design issue that's there. So then finally, I just want to hide this footer unless the user is signed in. So when they're not signed in, they can see the links at the bottom of the homepage, but when they're signed in, we will just hide that footer. And then because of this, then we need to get the content on the page to fill out the height of the browser window. So we'll try to do that now. Just try to get it stretching down to the bottom of the page so that gray background fills the page. And it's not quite ideal because we need our buttons underneath the images to appear. It's underneath the slider. So let's try to move this up. So if we inspect the page, the element on the page, we can see that the slide controls are underneath the slide's ID. So this list is actually pushing these down, these controls. So we can, I think we can change this to make the slide controls taller, and that will fill it out. So that's looking pretty good right now. And again, there's a bit of an issue here when we go to the smaller sizing, but we can tweak this to be full width at the smallest screen size, and then if it's bigger, it will go to a sidebar. So that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you guys have found this helpful, and if you've enjoyed this video, do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more videos, and I will see you guys in the next video.